In the annals of crime, some individuals have committed acts so heinous that they've etched themselves into the darkest corners of history. These are not your average criminals. They are the monsters who've haunted our nightmares, the specters that even the bravest among us fear. This is the shadowy world of serial killers, a place where the line between man and monster blurs, where right and wrong are twisted into grotesque shapes. We tread lightly here, for every step reveals a new horror, a new story of inhumanity. Please be warned, the content we're about to discuss is graphic and disturbing, and may not be suitable for all viewers. Discretion is strongly advised. Now steel your nerves and steady your heart as we delve into the chilling tales of the world's 10 most notorious serial killers. Ted Bundy, an American serial killer, was responsible for the assault and murder of at least 30 young women in the 1970s. Bundy was not just a murderer, he was a master manipulator, a man who used his charm and good looks to lure his victims into a false sense of security before revealing his true, monstrous nature. Born in Burlington, Vermont in 1946, Bundy was a seemingly normal child who grew up to become a sinister predator. His reign of terror spanned several states from Washington to Florida, leaving a trail of horror that still sends chills down the spine of anyone who dares to delve into his dark past. Bundy was a man of many faces. To some, he was a law student, to others, a political volunteer. But underneath these facades, he harbored a terrifying secret. He was a monster in disguise, a man who took pleasure in the pain and suffering of his innocent victims. After years of evading the law, Bundy was finally captured in 1978. His trial was a media spectacle, with Bundy often representing himself, further showcasing his manipulative nature. Despite his attempts to avoid justice, Bundy was sentenced to death. The man who had caused so much pain and suffering finally faced his own end in the electric chair. He was executed in 1989, bringing an end to the chilling saga of one of America's most notorious serial killers. Jeffrey Dahmer, known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, gruesomely murdered 17 young men between 1978 and 1991. His story is one of escalating brutality and disregard for human life. Dahmer didn't just kill his victims, he performed horrifying acts of dismemberment and necrophilia. Born and raised in Ohio, Dahmer's life was marred by a troubled upbringing. His descent into the abyss began in his late teens when he committed his first murder. From there, his crimes only grew more horrifying, leading him down a path of unimaginable darkness. Dahmer's reign of terror would eventually span 13 years, leaving a trail of pain and sorrow in its wake. His modus operandi was chillingly consistent. He would lure young men to his home, often with promises of money or companionship, before drugging, killing, and dismembering them. His horrifying spree finally came to an end in 1991, when one of his intended victims managed to escape and alert the police. Dahmer's apartment was a house of horrors, filled with photographs of his mutilated victims and physical evidence of his grisly crimes. Dahmer was eventually brought to trial, where he pled guilty and was sentenced to 16 consecutive life terms. However, justice was served in a different form when Dahmer was beaten to death by a fellow inmate just 2 years into his sentence. He met his end in prison in 1994. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, murdered 33 young men and boys in Illinois during the 1970s. A respected member of his community, Gacy's double life was as shocking as it was horrific. Beneath the facade of a jovial party clown and hard-working businessman lurked a predator with a chilling modus operandi. Gacy lured his victims with promises of construction work or simply by impersonating a police officer. Once he had his victims at his home, he would overpower them, torture them, and then strangle them to death. He buried many of his victims under his house, their graves going unnoticed for years. In December of 1978, one of Gacy's victims escaped and led police to his house. The ensuing investigation uncovered the gruesome burial site beneath Gacy's home. As the horrifying details of his crimes came to light, the nation was gripped with shock and revulsion. The trial that followed was one of the most high-profile cases of the 20th century. Gacy was found guilty of 33 counts of murder, making him at the time America's most prolific serial killer. He spent 14 years on death row, during which time he began painting, his artwork as unsettling as the man himself. His reign of terror ended with his execution in 1994, but the memory of his crimes lingers, a chilling reminder of the evil that can hide behind even the most ordinary of faces. Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov, was found guilty of 52 murders in the Soviet Union. This chilling moniker came from his brutal crimes committed between 1978 and 1990. Chikatilo preyed on the vulnerable. Women, children, runaways, and the homeless were his preferred victims. His reign of terror spanned over a decade, leaving a trail of horror in his wake. The Soviet police, unaccustomed to dealing with such a prolific killer, struggled to capture him. Chikatilo was able to evade capture for years, leaving the nation in a state of fear. His eventual capture in 1990 was a relief to the public, but the trial that followed was nothing short of a spectacle. Chikatilo's erratic behavior in court, coupled with the gruesome details of his crimes, sent shockwaves throughout the world. In the end, justice was served. After a long and tumultuous trial, Chikatilo was found guilty on 52 counts of murder. He was executed in 1994. Luis Garavito, La Bestia, confessed to the murder of 138 children in Colombia during the 1990s. His reign of terror was one that cast a dark shadow over the country for a decade. Garavito preyed on the vulnerable, targeting poor young boys who were often homeless or orphaned. He lured them with small gifts or money, then led them away to secluded areas where he committed his monstrous acts. The authorities were baffled for years, unable to connect the dots between the numerous cases. However, when a mass grave was discovered in 1999, the horrifying scale of his atrocities came to light. After his capture, Garavito confessed to his crimes in disturbing detail, showing little to no remorse for his actions. The Colombian justice system responded with the harshest sentence possible. He was sentenced to life in prison, a fate that many believe was far too lenient for such a beast. Pedro Lopez, known as the Monster of the Andes, claimed to have raped and killed more than 300 girls across South America. An embodiment of pure evil, Lopez's reign of terror spanned Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru throughout the 1970s and 1980s. His victims, largely young indigenous girls, were lured with trinkets and promises, only to meet an unspeakable end. Captured in 1980, Lopez confessed to his heinous crimes, leading police to unmarked graves and shocking the world with the scale of his atrocities. But, in a turn that added insult to injury for the families of his victims, Lopez was declared legally insane. Instead of facing the full force of the law, he was confined to a psychiatric hospital in Colombia. His confinement sparked international outrage, highlighting the need for legal reform and better protections for the most vulnerable. He was declared insane and detained in a psychiatric hospital. Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer, was convicted of 48 murders, mainly in Moscow's Bitsa Park. His reign of terror spanned from 1992 until his capture in 2006. Pichushkin's murderous spree was driven by a macabre competition with notorious serial killer Andrei Chikatilo. He aimed to claim more victims than his infamous predecessor. Pichushkin's hunting ground was the tranquil Bitsa Park, where he lured victims, often homeless men, with the promise of vodka. After sharing a drink with them, he would bludgeon them to death, leaving the bodies in the park. His capture came about when a woman he had dated left a note with his name and address before she went on a walk with him. When her body was discovered, the note led investigators straight to Pichushkin. During his trial, Pichushkin boasted about his crimes, showing no remorse. His chilling lack of empathy and the magnitude of his crimes led to his conviction. He received a life sentence in 2007. Anatoly Onoprienko, nicknamed the Beast of Ukraine, was responsible for 52 murders. A dark figure in the annals of crime, Onoprienko's reign of terror spanned a horrifying 6 years from 1989 to 1996. His victims, often entire families, were brutally murdered in their homes across Ukraine. Onoprienko's chilling methodology involved killing all witnesses, leading to the death of children alongside their parents. His seemingly random selection of victims and his nomadic lifestyle made it difficult for authorities to track him down. But his spree came to an end in 1996, when he was finally captured. During his trial, Onoprienko showed no remorse, claiming voices in his head had commanded him to kill. His cold-blooded crimes earned him a life sentence, which he served in Zhytomyr prison. Despite his monstrous acts, Onoprienko lived a relatively long life behind bars. Dying of heart failure at the age of 54, he died in prison in 2013. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, confessed to killing 71 women in the United States. His reign of terror spanned nearly 2 decades, beginning in the early 1980s and continuing through the millennium. Known for his chilling modus operandi, Ridgway would strangle his victims, often runaways and sex workers, leaving their bodies in clusters near the Green River in Washington state, hence his ominous moniker. Despite the vast number of victims and the brazen nature of his crimes, Ridgway eluded capture for years. It wasn't until advancements in DNA technology that law enforcement was able to finally connect the dots, tying him to the Green River murders. In 2001, Ridgway was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. In a chilling confession, Ridgway admitted to taking the lives of 71 women, although investigators believe the actual number could be much higher. He showed a disturbing lack of remorse, describing his horrific actions with a cold and detached demeanor that sent chills down the spines of those present. His confession led to a plea bargain, allowing him to avoid the death penalty. Instead, Ridgway received a sentence that matched the gravity of his crimes. 48 life sentences, without the possibility of parole, a term that was later extended as more victims were identified. He was sentenced to life in prison in 2003, where he remains to this day, a haunting symbol of the darkest depths of human depravity. Harold Shipman, a British doctor, was found guilty of the murder of 15 patients, though it's suspected he killed around 250. Known as Dr. Death, Shipman's victims were mainly elderly women, whom he killed with lethal doses of diamorphine, a form of heroin. He was a trusted figure in the community, which allowed his heinous crimes to go unnoticed for many years. In the late 90s, a local undertaker noticed an unusually high death rate among Shipman's patients, sparking an investigation. An audit of medical records revealed an alarming pattern of deaths occurring shortly after Shipman's house visits. The police were alerted, and in September 1998, Shipman was arrested. During his trial, the court heard chilling details of Shipman's crimes. He was accused of forging the will of one of his victims, Kathleen Grundy, to inherit her estate, which finally led to his downfall. The jury found him guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery in January 2000. Shipman was sentenced to life imprisonment with the recommendation of never being released. The case shocked the nation and led to significant changes in the medical profession's regulatory practices in the UK. However, the story of Dr. Death ended in a grim twist. In January 2004, Shipman was found dead in his prison cell, having taken his own life. He took his own life in prison in 2004. These 10 individuals represent some of the most disturbing chapters in criminal history. The atrocities they committed, from the Pacific Northwest of the United States to the far-flung landscapes of South America, from the bustling urban settings of Moscow to the quiet countryside of the United Kingdom, are a testament to the darkest corners of the human psyche. Each of these killers, in their time and place, unleashed a reign of terror that haunts us to this day. They targeted the vulnerable, exploited trust, and left a trail of victims that shocked the world. Ted Bundy's charm and deceitfulness, Jeffrey Dahmer's gruesome acts, John Wayne Gacy's double life, Andrei Chikatilo's reign of terror in the Soviet Union, Luis Garavito's horrific crimes against children, Pedro Lopez's monstrous rampage across South America, Alexander Pichushkin's deadly chess game, Anatoly Onoprienko's brutal spree in Ukraine, Gary Ridgway's long undetected killings, and Harold Shipman's betrayal of his Hippocratic oath. These names echo in the halls of infamy, their crimes a chilling reminder of the evil that can exist in our midst. But as we recount these grim tales, let us not forget the crucial role of law enforcement and justice systems in bringing these criminals to light. For each of these killers, their reign of terror ended not by their own volition, but by the tireless work of detectives, forensic scientists, psychologists, and many others who dedicated their lives to the pursuit of justice. In the face of such darkness, we must remember the importance of vigilance, of community, of never turning a blind eye to the signs of potential danger. We must uphold the values of justice, compassion, and respect for life, the very values that these killers so flagrantly violated. As we conclude this journey into the shadows of evil, let's not allow the stories of these notorious serial killers to breed fear, but instead let them reinforce our collective responsibility to protect, to care, and above all, to uphold justice. Their stories serve as grim reminders of the depths of human depravity and the importance of vigilance and justice in society.